There's a map sitting in a glass case in Istanbul right now. It was drawn on gazelle's skin. It shows coastlines that no European sailor had any business knowing about in 1513. And one of those coastlines, at the very bottom of the map, curving east below South America, matches the shape of a continent that nobody would officially set eyes on for another 307 years. That continent is Antarctica. The map is called the Piri Reis map. The man who drew it was an Ottoman admiral named Hagji Ahmed Muhiddin Piri. The date is stamped right there in Islamic calendar notation, year 919, which converts to 1513 in our calendar. Columbus had only made his first voyage 21 years earlier. The Americas were still being mapped, still being argued over. And Piri Reis, working in Gallipoli on a piece of preserved animal skin, drew something that looked remarkably like the frozen bottom of the world. This video is about how that happened, what the map actually shows, what the map does not show, and what the argument over that map forced scientists to do underground, literally 412 years later. If you care about documented history, the real kind, the kind with receipts and coordinates and arguments that have been going on since 1929, subscribe right now. It supports this channel more than you know. And drop a comment. Tell us which city you're listening from. We read every single one. This script is researched and factual. Primary sources include Gregory C. McIntosh's academic monograph, the Piri Reis Map of 1513, published by the University of Georgia Press in 2000, which remains the most rigorous cartographic analysis of the actual document, and the British Antarctic Survey's BedMap 3 dataset, published in Nature Scientific Data in March 2025, which used 84 new aerogeophysical surveys and 52 million additional data points to produce the most detailed map ever made of what lies under Antarctica's ice. Between those two sources, a cartographer's argument from 500 years ago and a satellite mission from this decade, you get the full picture of this story. Now back to it. Piri Reis was not a cartographer by trade. He was a pirate. Specifically, he sailed as a Barbary privateer alongside his uncle, Kamal Reis, across the Mediterranean during the 1490s. When Kamal Reis received an official commission in the Ottoman Navy in 1495, Piri went with him. They fought together against Venice. When Kamal Reis died at sea in 1511, Piri retired temporarily to Gallipoli and started drawing. He says in his own notes on the map, notes transcribed by Turkish scholar Bey Hasan Fehmi and published in 1935, that he compiled the map from 20 older charts and 8 world maps. He lists 8 Ptolemaic maps from the 2nd century, 4 Portuguese charts, 1 Arabic map, and 1 map belonging to Christopher Columbus, not a copy of Columbus's map. Columbus's actual map, or something directly derived from it, captured from a Spanish sailor during one of Piri's naval engagements. The Columbus connection matters. Columbus himself was working from sources that went back to Greek geographic theory. The ancient Greeks, specifically Ptolemy, had argued for centuries that a large southern landmass had to exist to balance the landmasses in the northern hemisphere. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. Every map from the 1400s through the 1700s drew it in as a theoretical continent, stretching south and east across the bottom of the world. Not because anyone had been there, because it had to be there, mathematically, philosophically, to balance the globe. Here is the critical detail that changes everything. Or rather, the detail that makes people think it changes everything until you look closer. The southern portion of the Piri Reis map, the part below South America, shows a landmass curving to the east, a long coastline, fairly detailed, far below the bottom of South America. When American professor Charles Hapgood published his book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings in 1965, he aligned this coastline with satellite images of Antarctica and declared it a match. Not just any match, a match with ice-free Antarctica, the continent as it looked before the ice sheet formed. Hapgood argued that someone, thousands of years before 1513, had mapped Antarctica from the air or from the sea while it was still free of ice, and had passed that map down through centuries of copies until it landed in Piri Reis's hands. That is a remarkable claim. Here is what the cartographic evidence actually supports. The southernmost point on the Piri Reis map that scholars can confirm with certainty is a stretch of Brazilian coastline near Cabo Frio and the region around Cananea at 25 degrees south latitude. That matches exactly where Amerigo Vespucci stopped on his voyages. The coast south of that point on the map curves sharply east, which is what you would expect from a cartographer of that era, filling in blank space at the edge of his knowledge, following the convention that a great southern continent had to exist down there. The Orontius Phineas map drawn in 1531 and the Felipe Boache map drawn in 1739 do the same thing, drawing large and sometimes detailed southern continents before anyone had been near Antarctica. When detailed overlays are done, Not casually, but with actual geographic coordinates. The Piri Reis map's southern coastline does not match Antarctica. The scale is wrong, key features are missing, the orientation is off. The Galactic Mind academic dossier on the Piri Reis map, published in November 2025, and citing UNESCO's Memory of the World assessment alongside Macintosh's analysis, states clearly that claims of an ice-free Antarctic match are not supported by cartographic scholarship. The southern land on the map is, in all probability, the same Terra Australis convention that appears on dozens of maps of that period. A theoretical continent, not a surveyed one. But here's where this gets genuinely strange, and where the argument stops being about one Ottoman admiral and starts being about what is actually buried under the ice. Antarctica has been covered in ice for somewhere between 23 million and 34 million years, depending on which geological record you look at. 97.6% of the continent is currently under ice. The ice sheet averages about 1.9 kilometers thick. At its deepest point, east of the Gembertsev mountain range, it hits 4 kilometers. The continent beneath that ice is effectively invisible from the surface, which is exactly why Charles Hapgood's claim could be debated for decades without resolution. You cannot prove what Antarctica looked like under the ice without drilling through it or flying instruments over it and bouncing radar waves off the bedrock below. Scientists started doing exactly that in the 1950s. They called the first organized effort BedMap, then BedMap 2 in 2013, then in 2024, and formally published in Nature Scientific Data in March 2025, BedMap 3. BedMap 3 is not a small update. It incorporated 84 new aerogeophysical surveys from 15 different data providers. It added 52 million new data points. It added 1.9 million kilometers of measurement lines flown across the continent. It filled enormous gaps in the mapping of the Gembertsev subglacial mountains in East Antarctica, the deep interior, the West Antarctic coastlines, and the Antarctic Peninsula. The result is a subglacial topographic map of Antarctica in more detail than has ever existed. What did they find under the ice? Mountains. Real ones. The Gembertsev subglacial mountains in East Antarctica rise to about 3,400 meters above sea level, buried entirely under ice, unknown to science until 1958 when Soviet seismic surveys detected them. They are roughly the size of the European Alps. They have never been seen by human eyes. A study published in the journal Science in January 2026, led by researcher Helen Ockenden of the University of Edinburgh and the Institut des Géosciences de l'Environnement, used a technique called ice flow perturbation analysis, using satellite observations of the ice surface and the physics of how ice flows over bedrock, to map mesoscale features between 2 and 30 kilometers across. Their map revealed alpine valleys, deeply scoured lowlands, and eroded ice stream troughs. The authors noted in their published findings that the landscape is far more varied than previous surveys had assumed. There is also water under the ice, not hypothetical water. Actual liquid lakes. BedMap. 3 maps, more than 400 of them, sitting at the base of the ice sheet under enormous pressure. Lake Vostok, directly beneath Russia's Vostok Station. The station, where the lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth's surface, minus 89.2 degrees Celsius, was logged in July 1983, is the largest. It is roughly the size of Lake Ontario. It has been sealed under the ice for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. Russian scientists drilled through to it in February 2012. After decades of work and recovered water samples and core material, there are river systems too. In 2013, British scientists using satellite imaging identified 3 ancient river basins running beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, carved by flowing water before the ice formed. The largest, running through what is now called the Ellsworth Subglacial Highlands, would have been a river valley comparable in scale to the Grand Canyon before it was buried. That finding, published in Nature by the British Antarctic Survey, confirmed something ice core analysis had been hinting at. Parts of Antarctica were ice-free and geologically active more recently than the official story of a continent frozen for 30 million years suggests. Ice core samples from Dome C and Law Dome have produced pollen data and biological material indicating that portions of Antarctica may have experienced ice-free conditions as recently as 5,000 to 10,000 years ago during localized warm periods. Not the whole continent, not the coastlines. But the argument that Antarctica was entirely frozen and inaccessible for every moment of human civilization is more complicated than it sounds. This is the wedge point in the Piri Reis debate, not the map itself, not Hapgood's alignment argument, which does not survive cartographic scrutiny. The wedge point is this: if a coastline of Antarctica was accessible, even seasonally, even briefly, during periods when early maritime civilizations were active in the South Atlantic and South Pacific, then the theoretical southern continent drawn on maps might have had, at some point in the chain of copies going back through history, a single real observation at its foundation. That is not proof. It is a possibility. The difference between those two things matters enormously. If you value this kind of documented, sourced, no-nonsense history, subscribe. It is the best way to support what we do here. And leave a comment with your city. Seriously, it means a lot. The standard explanation for the Piri Reis map's southern landmass is that it is Terra Australis, a cartographic convention, not a discovery. Every serious cartographic historian holds this position. The Galactic Mind dossier, cross-referencing UNESCO, Macintosh, and multiple ResearchGate analyses published through 2025, confirms that no robust match exists between the Piri Reis map's southern coastline and the subglacial Antarctic coast, as revealed by radar. Now to Antarctica itself. The year is 1820. The date is January 28th. The place is the Southern Ocean, approximately 69 degrees south, 2 degrees west. Russian Imperial Navy Captain Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, commanding 2 ships named Vostok and Mirny, records in his journal seeing what he describes as massive ice formations of extreme height. Historians analyzing his coordinates believe he saw the ice shelves of what is now called the Princess Martha Coast, part of Queen Maud Land, East Antarctica. 2 days later, on January 30th, British Royal Navy officer Edward Bransfield, sailing the brig Williams with Captain William Smith, sighted solid rock and 2 high mountains covered in snow on what is now called Trinity Peninsula, the northernmost point of the Antarctic mainland. Bransfield made charts. Those charts are still held by the United Kingdom Hydrographic Office in Taunton, Somerset, though Bransfield's original journal was lost, likely because the Admiralty was more interested at the time in finding the Northwest Passage. Nathaniel Palmer, a 21-year-old seal hunter from Stonington, Connecticut, commanding a small sloop called Hero, reached the Antarctic Peninsula in November 1820 and recorded his sighting on November 17th. He was the first American. 3 men, 3 nations, 2 days apart, all in 1820, 307 years after Piri Reis completed his map. Now comes the part of this story that is not about maps at all. On December 1st, 1959, 12 nations signed a treaty in Washington, D.C., Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The treaty came into force on June 23, 1961. It defined Antarctica as any land and ice shelf south of 60 degrees south latitude, and it declared that zone dedicated to peaceful purposes only. No military bases, no weapons testing, no nuclear explosions, no new territorial claims. Today, 58 nations have signed or acceded to the treaty. The Protocol on Environmental Protection, signed in Madrid in 1991 and in force since 1998, added another prohibition: no mineral extraction, no oil drilling, no mining. The continent sits on what a United States Geological Survey estimate placed at over 500 billion barrels of oil in the Ross Sea region alone, comparable to the largest reserves on Earth. And it is entirely off limits to commercial exploitation. That ban has no fixed expiry date. Tourist access is limited to strictly defined areas. Visiting for any reason requires a permit from a signatory nation, an environmental impact assessment, and documented insurance. The ice interior, where the Gomburtsev Mountains sit buried under 4 kilometers of ice, where Lake Vostok sits sealed under 25 million years of silence, where ancient river valleys run beneath the west coast, almost nobody goes there. Not because it is illegal, because it is inhospitable in a way that makes Mars seem approachable. Minus 89 degrees Celsius, 100 km/h winds persisting for weeks, 6 months of darkness. And yet governments maintain research stations there. The United States maintains McMurdo Station on Ross Island, capable of housing more than 1,000 people in summer. Russia maintains Vostok Station, built directly above the ancient sealed lake. China opened Taishan Station in the interior of East Antarctica in 2014 and has been expanding its Antarctic infrastructure at a pace that other treaty nations have publicly noted with interest. The official reason is science, climate data, ice cores. The Dome Sea Ice Core in East Antarctica, completed by the European Project for Ice Coring in Antarctica in 2004, contains the most detailed continuous atmospheric record in human history. 800,000 years of temperature and greenhouse gas data, compressed into layers of ice above a lake that has never seen sunlight. Back to Istanbul, the Topkapi Palace, a fragment of map on gazelle skin, 1/3 of an original that no longer exists, found in a basement by German theologian Gustav Adolf Deissmann and Turkish museum director Halil Edem in late 1929 during a routine cataloging project. Piri Reis himself had been executed in 1553 on orders of the Ottoman Sultan for reasons that had nothing to do with cartography. The map he made in 1513 had sat unseen for 412 years. When cartographers began analyzing it seriously, the argument over the southern landmass consumed decades of journal space and produced a generation of competing theories. ancient advanced civilizations, extraterrestrial assistance, lost source maps dating back to Alexander the Great. Hapgood's 1965 book triggered all of it. Graham Hancock's 1995 Fingerprints of the Gods spread it to a mass audience. The academic consensus pushed back hard, and for cartographic reasons that hold up. The map does not match Antarctica when you do the actual overlay work. But here is what does not appear on any ancient map. The Gomburtsev subglacial mountains. Mountains never above the ice in any time period accessible to human civilization. Mountains that Aristotle could not have dreamed existed. Mountains that Piri Reis could not possibly have had a source for. They are real. They are the size of the Alps. They have never been seen. The Russian drilling team reached Lake Vostok in February 2012 and brought up ice core material from just above the water surface. Analysis showed microbial DNA. Life, possibly ancient, possibly not found anywhere else on Earth, living in the dark under 4 kilometers of ice and 25 million years of pressure. No civilization put it there. No ancient map led anyone to it. No treaty protects it from curiosity. It had simply been waiting.